Welcome, everyone, to this webinar from Products That Count. My name is Nisarg Desai, and I'm your host for the evening. And I'm super excited for today. We have a very special guest and a very special topic. But before we go there, anyone who has been with us before, welcome back. Anyone who's new or first time to my series of webinars or to PTC, welcome. You're in for a treat. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are and when you're watching this. If it's live, thank you so much for being live. You have some advantages of being able to ask us questions. If you're watching this in the future, thank you for watching nonetheless. So, a quick intro for those who don't know me. My name is Nisarg Desai. I lead the Boston chapter for Products That Count. And in my day job, I am the director of product management at a cybersecurity company called Huntress, where we try and serve and protect the small and medium businesses from hackers every single day. More about that in a little bit. I've been in cybersecurity for the last 15 years, been in product for the last 10, and that's going to be super interesting today because our guest today also works in cybersecurity, but both of us have very different domains of work and very different approaches to the problems that we solve. So it'll be interesting to understand how we see cybersecurity differently. So that's number one. I'm also very interested and excited about today's topic because it's talking about, obviously, everyone's favorite topic, AI. Different types of AI. Gen AI has been in the news, ad nauseum of late, and every single PM, product leader, product person is being asked slash tasked slash told to go and pursue AI as a means to an end of efficiency, of advancement, to show innovation, etc. And everyone's rushing to do this. But while we do that, we are leaving ourselves open to a whole slew and range of cyber attacks. And we are going to hear today about how you can protect yourself from that. What are the risks? What are the concerns? And why AI is awesome, but AI is also risky. It's a double-edged sword always. And we'll discuss that today with our guest. So without further ado, let me talk about who we have today. So our guest for today's webinar is Vikas Shetty. He is the head of product at a very interesting company called Arkose Labs. And they are doing some really, really cool stuff in protecting really large enterprises, especially in the fintech space, from cyber attacks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Vikas and his background. I'm going to ask him a couple of questions, and we'll kind of understand who he is, where he is coming from, how he got to where he is today, and then we'll jump into the main topic, which is adapting to the age of AI-driven cybersecurity threats. These are real threats, and then we have some real solutions of how we can protect you. So, welcome, Vikas. Thank you for being on this one.
My pleasure, Nisarg. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. Vikas, why don't you give us a little bit of an intro for yourself, what you are doing right now, and if you can also give us a little bit of your background of where you are. Particularly, I find interesting that we have a lot of PMs or junior PMs or budding PMs who watch this. They are interested in how your journey has evolved. So, how do you start off in tech? Then you move to PM, and how do you end up as the head of product at Arkose Labs? So, give us a little bit of that.
All right. So I'll start with what I do now. I am the head of product management and research at Arkose Labs. I've been here for about 2.5 years. So my day job is pretty much all the way from research, identifying a good idea, and then converting that into a product, concept to launch. I'm responsible for the entire life cycle there. My journey actually the product management journey started in my previous company. This company, some of you would know, Akamai Technologies. They're one of the largest CDNs out there and one of the largest security companies. So I worked there for about 15 years. But it was an interesting journey. So I didn't start as a PM. So I think my journey started on the engineering side of the house. So I was actually initially working from the platform engineering side of the house, fine tuning performance on CDNs, identifying milliseconds, and seeing how to how to kind of improve the first byte, time to first byte, things like that. And then I moved on to, interesting enough, pre-sales. So I did pre-sales for some time, actually supporting and helping the pre-sales teams. I did post-sales. I think that's where I kind of got a sense of the real customer needs, the real pain points that they face, and that was very helpful. And then from there I moved to security, and security was like, this was like the initial age of WAF, and like 2011, 2012. And if folks here remember about Anonymous, those large DDoS attacks. So that's where my journey started. From nowhere, I was picked and said, okay, fine, tomorrow you're going to do security, hire a SOC, and then figure out things from there. So that's where my security journey started. And then moved away from security, went back to engineering. I ran engineering for a while. And then that's where my product journey started. Is we started developing solution, and my company had a very interesting concept where if you had a great idea, they'll fund it as long as you show the returns, right? So we had a good idea, got the funding from the business. We developed the product, show the value, and that's where the journey started. Over a period of time, we went on to kind of formalize that process. I eventually ended up owning both product management and engineering for quite a period of time. And then the whole itch to try something new and get into the startup world it kind of pushed me, and that's where I landed at Arkose. And yeah, been in different roles throughout my career. So I had a very unusual product management journey, so to say.
That's very interesting. And I see so many parallels, but also so many differences. Where I did product engineering to start with, and I went into PM, and now I'm doing platform, but from a PM perspective. So it's quite interesting. Tell me more about Arkose. What does Arkose do?
So Arkose is a bot management company, but in terms of what we do is a little wider than that. We're actually more of an account security company. We actually protect some of the largest enterprises out there. If you look at our client base, you'll see all the big names there, right from X to Microsoft to OpenAI, uh, Amazon, everyone. You see the entire list of large enterprises there. We protect these large companies from malicious bots, and we block those attacks right at the gate at login, sign up. Right, we kind of protect them against ATO, things like card testing, SMS toll fraud, phishing, protection, email related fraud. Across the board. I think everything that is around the ATO and anything that's adjacent to it, we provide protection. And uh, that's where we closely see the evolution of AI, because when you talk about bots, I mean, AI, I think you mentioned earlier, ML was always used and AI was always used for bots. But with Gen AI, obviously, they're getting supercharged. So we're in a very interesting space, and especially with large customers, we also see those trends upfront.
Yeah, I'm very curious to learn more about your talk today because I work in cybersecurity as well, but completely on the other side of the spectrum. So we protect very, very small, medium businesses, folks that have 1 employee, 5 employees, 10 employees at most. And what we find is the hackers or the attackers that we are protecting them from are mostly human, and
Yep.
they're using very simple techniques to get through the chink in the armor. So using more simplistic and easier to find techniques, but also obviously the attack surface and people are very different, much larger in terms of businesses. So very unique perspectives and approaches to cybersecurity. That is awesome. So before we get into the main content, a quick point for anyone who's joining us live. Please pause us, stop us, ask us questions. There's a Q&A function built into the Zoom chat. So send us those questions, and we'll try and answer those live as much as possible. If you can't get to them, or if you don't think of them today, I'm sure, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm sure Vikas would be happy to,
Yep.
talk to you on LinkedIn as well and answer those questions. So, um, with that, why don't I have you take it away, Vikas, with your content, and I'm eager to see what you have to say.
Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen and let me know. It's going to slideshow
I
on.
I can confirm I can see the right screen.
All right, awesome, cool. So yeah, I think as Nisarg mentioned, I think AI is the topic of the day. If you, I mean, anywhere, everywhere, it's all about AI. AI is not new, but I think Gen AI has kind of piqued this interest across the board. And this is not only within the security community, but interesting enough, even within the malicious actor community as well, the bad actors as well, and everyone has interest in this topic. Before I kind of talk through some of the trends that we're seeing, let me quickly talk about what we do at Arkose Labs, right? And why we kind of, the way we tackle the problem is very unique compared to the traditional, security strategies. So our philosophy is pretty straightforward. It's about disrupting your adversarial economics. Um, the space that we operate in is an adversarial space, which means it's always in motion. As we put in the right measures, as we start building new capabilities, we have these adversaries who also evolve, who also are looking at the best technologies, who are also trying to ensure that they are staying a step ahead. So in this race, I think what's very important is, I think if you are waiting for a day where you block everything, you kind of mitigate every kind of attack, that's not very realistic. That's an impossible thing given the resources out there. So the right approach is, at least our approach is, to ensure that we don't defeat them in terms of mitigating every attack, but we make it very economically unviable for them to continue with what they're doing, right? So we do that in three phases or three approaches, right? The first one is we increase the cost and effort. So we are at the gate of most of these large companies. Like you kind of log into, you sign up on Microsoft, there is Arkose running there. You type a prompt on OpenAI, there's Arkose running there. We block those attackers at the gate, which means we protect the customers, they don't see the impact downstream. The second thing is, because we are dynamically now changing our strategy, right, the security posture, it's much more difficult for the attacker to now keep on evolving. At some point, it becomes really impossible for them to keep up. The second thing is we decrease the value for these attackers. In some scenarios where customers do really want to see these attackers come through, because they want to also understand about the analytics aspects of it. Uh, they want to kind of fingerprint those in a very different way, right, in terms of transactions. So in those scenarios, we actually provide a lot of data to our customers. So the customers can use those data and what we call a shadow banning, right? They take the data and then downstream they ban them, so that it also increases the value of those accounts created for those attackers. And the third one is real world consequences, right? In the world that we live in, proactive threat intel is very important. You just can't wait for an attacker to show up and and has a new way of kind of getting through your defenses. So we actually do proactive threat intel. We keep a lookout of different kinds of technologies used out there, and in some cases we also take necessary action, right? And these attackers then have a real world consequence in terms of be it banning their infrastructure, be it working with legal agencies, things like that. So these are the three different approaches, and I think with these we ensure that eventually the attackers don't find it viable to attack these customers. So that's kind of the approach that we follow. Where we are deployed, right? If you really look at this graph here, right? So we are deployed at the beginning of any transaction, and there are benefits to this. So we are co-deployed in cases where there is WAF. So there could be a traditional WAF, and we are kind of deployed on top of it. We are a very specialist product. In some cases, we're also deployed alongside a more commodity bot management solution. But the real impact is in terms of the core registration, login, and a password recovery. Those key high value transactions is where we are deployed. We then actually, once we're deployed in these transactions, we also then pass information back to the downstream fraud platform. So that is then consumed on the downstream transactions or downstream workflows where we are not actually directly deployed, but our data is then used. So that's one of the key things to ensure that your strategy, right, as the owner of the platform, you have a holistic strategy where the signals that are gathered at different phases of your transaction are holistically viewed, and then you're able to take action against them. So that is kind of how we are deployed across the board. One other thing is, given how sophisticated these attacks are, we also follow a philosophy or follow an approach called multi-dimension detection. Anyone in the security domain will know that it's very difficult for you to have a few different ways of detection and hope that that'll stick for or that'll hold for a long time. It's pretty much impossible given where we are right now. So we actually use different kinds of strategies, and that includes, as you see mentioned here, we look at device-based information, behavioral biometrics-based information, network-based information, a bunch of other things, which also helps and caters to downstream workflows where, for instance, if you have device-based information like a device ID, that could be used for account sharing kind of fraud. Behavioral biometrics could be used in terms of transaction-based fraud. So all of that information, again, is passed across to our downstream systems. So but the focus is, yes, how do you really eliminate bad actors at the top of the funnel? The platform.
Just a quick point there, because sorry to interrupt there. Really cool that you've been able to integrate the Boston subway map into your slide.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
if
it's very
folks didn't
easy
notice.
I think the red line is a little shorter here, I think, but yes.
Definitely, yeah. Red line, even the green line.
Yep.
But that's pretty cool that you've mapped that. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I had to mention that.
Yeah, in terms of the platform itself, right? It's a four pillar, right? We have four pillars. The first one is proactive defense, which is where all the systems that are effectively able to identify this attack. I think that's kind of covered under the defense. This includes both active fingerprinting, which is when a session comes in, looking for those different kinds of signals. Proactive detection mechanisms, again, on the existing flow, not only looking at that particular session, but holistically looking at the context as well as other signals that we've seen across our platform. The next one is intelligence, which I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, is this proactive intelligence. So that comes from subject matter experts, that comes from our researchers, as well as our SOC team, right? As they see new kinds of attacks coming through, we codify that, and that goes into the platform. The second one is adaptive response. And adaptive response is, once you see a particular kind of an attack, how do you really mitigate it, right? There are different approaches. We have a very differentiated positioning here. We have both audio-based challenges. We have video-based challenge. We have visual challenges. We have a patented solution called Match Key. And we also have non-visual ways of challenging, right? This is on top of the traditional ways of mitigating attacks, which is you're blocking an attacker or dropping their session, things like that. The advantage here is that because we have this adaptive response, we tend to learn how an attacker is trying to also solve, let's say, one of our match key puzzles, and that feedback is also used on our platform, which is again very unique. This kind of a synergy and both adaptive response and proactive defense being on the same platform, at least on the bot side, is very unique. Third is actionable data, and finally, as with any security platform, we do have our own 24/7 SOC team. There are obviously zero-day attacks. There are very sophisticated attacks, and I think that's where the human element comes in, and the SOC looks into the signals that they're able to mitigate those attacks. This is our approach in terms of our platform itself. It's pretty clean defense, and then obviously whatever is not possible by the platform is taken care of by the SOC team.
There's one question here, Vikas, which is around your comment on drive up adversarial effort and cost, right? Obviously, the higher the effort, the cost, the lower value for the target or time to value for the attacker. But how do you measure adversarial effort and cost? Like when you say, "Yep, this is high enough," when do you know that that's the case?
So in our world, it's pretty interesting. What happens is there's a dark web market for instance, ATO, like compromised accounts, right? Or new signups, new accounts created, and there's price associated with that. So we pretty much know that what is an ongoing price and what are people willing to pay. Because think of it this way, right? The bad actors here are not kind of lone wolf, individuals who are just trying to attack a particular website. There is an economy associated with that, and in some cases, these are larger than our companies. Like there are thousands of people as part of this one, what we call as cyber as crime. I mean, crime as service kind of platforms and solutions. So all of that information is in fact available, and in fact, they also quote it almost like a ticker price. They show at what point it becomes viable for them, and they keep on increasing the cost, and at some point they just give up. So it's pretty organized in that way. It's very, very interesting as well, but it's very organized.
That's pretty cool. We do have a question from the audience for a person who has their hands up. Unfortunately, we cannot have the audience ask them live through audio, so you will have to send them in through the Q&A function of Zoom. So please send that in. Happy to answer it live, but there is no way for you to ask the question live through audio. So we'll keep a lookout for that. Send that in. Until then, let's keep going with the rest of the presentation.
Anyway, cool. And just a quick note on the kind of customers, right? I think this is the kind of customers that rely on our solution, and across different kinds of verticals. You have the names here, all the big guys in the industry here. What's interesting is also because we have some of these largest customers, right? So we have the benefit of this network effect or network intelligence. Because as we see different kinds of attacks coming up in a particular industry or particular sector, that goes into a platform, and then we're able to derive intelligence out of it, and that is then used. That is then used to actually mitigate attacks. And this is very helpful and unique. Again, going back to the AI discussion, because we have some of these largest customers, their adversaries are also incentivized, or they have enough resources to actually build capabilities and look for the latest technology. So what we see is that these attackers really adapt some of the latest technologies pretty quickly, and that gives us pretty good insights on our platform. As soon as we see anything new, any new tech out there, we immediately see on our platform. And that helps us kind of build the defenses and look at the trends and things like that. So yeah, so that's in terms of the platform itself, right? Now I'll take a pause here if there are any questions before we move on to the topic around Gen AI.
I'm still waiting on the person from the audience to ask a question. Please send that in if you haven't already. But the question I have for you, Vikas, is you had a long list of customers on your slides. A lot of them were large enterprise customers. And coming from Huntress, my question clearly is, what about the small guys? What about the little guys? Are they not a target? Are they not a big enough target for these kind of attackers, or are they simply ones that they can't afford anything, so there's no help for them?
So good question, actually. So what happens is, at least what we see in our space, is that the attack profile, right, or the sophistication of the attack varies across the customer segment. And the reason being that, again, it's an ROI question, right? If I can make more money going after these large enterprises, and if there is more demand for, ATO, account takeover, or stolen, accounts, or fake accounts for these large customers, then I'm more likely to go after this large enterprises and invest accordingly. So what we see is that for smaller set of accounts or customers, we don't see the same kind of attacks. Those attacks are pretty straightforward in some cases, or it could be, not at the same volume as we see for these large customers. These guys, as I said, there's a parallel economy, and it's almost like an industry. And for them to sustain, they need to have a certain scale, and that's only possible when they go after these big customers.
Absolutely. So this is international organized cybercrime that we're talking about.
Yep.
And so my follow-up question to what you said is, for your customers, do you find that it is always this specific segment of organized cybercrime, the same sets of threat actors who are coming to attack them, and it's a constant battle with them, or is it more random and it could be anyone who's trying to go after these sets of
Oh,
customers?
oh, it's very diverse. So in fact, it depends on the industry. It depends on the vertical, right? You have different kinds of attackers in different verticals because uh, when we talk about the workflows, right? The way these attackers make money across different verticals and different industries is very different. The attack vectors are very different. Like in banking, it could be uh, ETO, it could be card skimming, or it could be card testing. Uh, it could be phishing in the banking sector. Whereas when you look at tech sector, it could be pure play ETO. Right. So different verticals have different attack vectors and different vulnerabilities, and that's what these attackers are going after. What's interesting is there are, of course, groups that are specialized around it. So they do share information across. But yeah, I think that kind of tools that they use, the tech that they use varies across verticals. The more sophisticated the vertical is, especially the tech sector, the more sophisticated the tools are.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, exactly. I think the more advanced a sector is with their cybersecurity and also with their technology,
Yeah.
their attackers are equally, more advanced. So that makes a lot of
Correct.
sense.
And keep in mind, and that's I mean, it's an amazing point you mentioned, because these companies already have defenses in place. These are large companies; they take their security very seriously. So, which means if someone has to really attack these companies, they need to have equally good set of capabilities and infrastructure, and funding and resourcing.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that.
Okay, if there are no more questions, let's get to Gen AI, right? So we've been very fortunate to be able to see these emerging attack vectors as soon as the Gen AI evolution started, and partly because of the kind of customers we have. Because and these are some of the early adopters of Gen AI. The second thing was, I think, also the kind of attacks that we have. These were also the early adopters of Gen AI. This is why I think we keep calling Gen AI and generally AI as a double-edged sword, because it benefits both the attackers as well as the defenders, right? So we started seeing these early signs on how people are very creative in using Gen AI technologies. Um, there are multiple trends that we saw, but there are a few notable ones, right? I think one thing that we saw is with Gen AI, it almost reduced the barrier to entry for these attackers. In the past, what you would see is if someone had to really set up a ATO kind of attack stack, they had to know their stuff. Either they had to know tech, or they had to go and hire the right people, or they had to have a team which could do things for them. But that has changed. And with Gen AI, the barrier to entry has gone down. I mean, there are enough platforms that are almost automating a large part of the kill chain. And in some cases, it's just natural language. You just tell what needs to be done, and there is code that's generated for you. So that is the first one, right? It's reduced the barrier to entry in quite a few of these attack vectors. Scraping is a good example. The second one is, even in case of existing attack vectors, it's completely turbocharged those attack vectors and made them more potent. For instance, in case of device spoofing, is a very good example where if someone had to really spoof a device, they had to spend a lot of time with permutation combination of different signals to get to a signal that they think can evade detection. With Gen AI in the mix, that is already done. People are using it. People have tried using Gen AI to come up with those combinations. And then Gen AI has introduced new attack methods and vectors, uh, specifically going after chat assistants, for instance. So we've seen few notable trends on our platform, right? I think the first one is, as I mentioned, it's an evolution of this malicious ATO bots and scrapers. Now, scrapers have always been there, and it's not a new technology, but we've seen a sudden surge in terms of scraper traffic. and the sophistication of these toolkits that I use there. The second one is infrastructure for abusive use of Gen AI platforms themselves. Again, Gen AI has a double-edged sword. There are interesting ecosystems out there that are trying to abuse your foundational models, steal data, things like that. That's kind of a big new emerging attack vector we are seeing. Phishing is the other one. Phishing has moved away. I mean, it's moved on from being just a fake website where you just get lured into a website, you get into the website and you key in your credentials, and then the website pretty much drops your connection because there's nothing else beyond that one page. It's completely changed now with the really sophisticated phishing toolkits out there, which are again powered and supported by Gen AI platforms. And the last one is, in terms of computer vision and deepfake, which I think all of us know about deepfake, and it's becoming a big nuisance. If you really look at the scraping traffic, right? So this is the numbers are a little old, but this trend has continued. There's a sudden rise or sudden increase in just pure scraper traffic, and there are multiple reasons for that. And the top two reasons for this increase is again because of Gen AI. Right. And we're also seeing similar growth in other kinds of attack vectors, be it your fake account or account takeover and card testing, things like that. But scraping has kind of shot up substantially. And interesting enough, this completely coincides or is kind of correlates with the growth of foundational models and open models as well. So what you see here is year-on-year growth of new open models, LLM models, right? So which means they are that much more data hungry, which means there are many more scrapers out there to begin with that are scraping data from these websites, right? This is the initial phase of building those models. And this trend is not going away. What you see on the right-hand side is, typically we have this, the assumption was that over a period of time, the growth curve of these LLMs will kind of taper off. Right, we haven't seen that happening yet. And every other day you see a new model, a new version coming out. You see the sizes increase, and you see new versions of the models coming out, which means as this continues, there's need for more data and latest data, right? So the scraping is going to continue. So that is the first one, right? I think these two trends meant that I think your need to actually scrape data to actually train these models will continue for the foreseeable future. But the second trend is even more interesting. The second one is this, which is essentially what's now happening is that you have the AI data that you have these new models that are created, that are trained. Now the models are now used to create bots. Now all of us know about the LAMs out there. I mean, large language action models or large action models. That's kind of the future. We have the agentic workflow, agentic evolution happening now. But the interesting bit is, again, there is these platforms that are making it much easier to build these bots and, in fact, execute these bots, both in case of scraping as well as ATO. So this is two-way stream now. The first one is how do you really build smarter LLM platforms? On the other direction, how these LLM platforms, they're getting more and more smarter. They're actually reducing the barrier to entry for these attackers. And what it's also doing is that, hey, it's also increasing the number of players in the space, the number of people who want to actually get into this, go into an ATO fraud or scraping, just because it's that much more easier. What also is kind of impacting or helping this thing is the general evolution of technology as well. We're also seeing things like headless browser, which is, again, evolving pretty quickly, which is also one of the beneficiaries of the whole LLM or Gen AI evolution, because for agentic workflows, you definitely need things like headless browsers that behave like a real browser that can evade detection. So that technology has evolved as well. So again, this is how, again, double-edged sword, Gen AI as in a double-edged sword, where it's helping build new capabilities, where it's also enhancing and providing these very powerful tools to our attackers and making it difficult for the defenders to protect their assets and properties online. So that's on scraping.
So I had a
Take a
question
pause.
here,
Mm-hmm.
Vikas. So you know, you mentioned open models and scraping and loss from those. I mean, it seems like your first scenario almost made it seem that that legitimate use of models is actually not so legitimate.
Yep.
But keeping that ethics question aside, um, what is there to say about private models? Right? I can simply say, "Hey, my model is private, and therefore I'm safe." Is that true? Is that false? Yeah. Is it more nuanced?
So I think the scenario, the first scenario that you mentioned, right? I think what I had earlier is essentially training new models. So if you are training your model based on your own data, that's fine because you own the data. You're not stealing or scraping the data from anyone. So it's your own model. But we know that all the open models out there, right? Once you actually publish something as an open model, you could then take that and then fine tune the model and eventually claim that it's your private model. It's very
Yes.
difficult unless you have enormous resources. It's very difficult for anyone to go out there and build a foundational model from scratch, right? So even to build a SML or a small or SLMs like small language models, you definitely would take a BERT or something, which is a smaller foundational model, and then fine tune on top of it. So the problem with that is, I think it's a good point you mentioned, is that the more people go and pick up these open models and then start training, obviously they they have to have data. If it's your
Exactly.
private data, it's great. But if your whole ambition or if your whole goal is to actually start building those data, these models, then you're kind of getting the data from the public internet. We had interesting scenarios where uh, some of the models were directly competing with some of these companies' legitimate products,
Mm,
right? So if I had a website that had academic content, and I'm trying to monetize it, build my own model, and then you ask a question, you get the response, I'm going to monetize it. But if you have a scraper that has already scraped all of that content, and then they publish it in one of the open model channels that, hey, this is the model and this has been trained on this data, right? So that's a problem. I think that is where the first issue comes up: is how do you really protect your data from these scrapers?
exactly.
The second one is the other way around: is there are these models that are making it much more easier for attackers to build the scraping technology themselves.
Yes, which is this scenario.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. That's very interesting because you know, ultimately, you try and protect your data, which itself
Yep.
is, you know, a lot of hard
Yep.
work. And secondly, you also don't always have enough data or enough variety in your data to be able to train your own models. So you have to
Correct.
go and acquire data from
Yep.
somewhere, and that's not always possible. So we it's a losing battle against trying to protect your data, get a good model, get data from elsewhere, which itself has, you know, cost and
Yep.
complications there, which you and so therefore in the meantime, there are all these open models with lots of data that has
Yep.
been either legally or illegally gotten and then trained on it, and therefore you have a whole host of free services that you can just leverage instead. So, which one do you choose? Um,
Yep.
yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, I think the other scenario we're seeing, which this is an interesting one, is we're seeing this concept of there's malicious reverse proxies. We also call them LLM proxies. So what has happened is a lot of the foundational models, right? The way Gen AI has evolved, there are nation states involved now. I mean, I think foundation models are seen as assets, and every country wants to invest into it. What also has happened is there are a lot of restrictions now. For instance, some of our foundational models are not necessarily accessible in certain geographies. So, right, in certain countries, but people do want to access them, right? So people have found ways. These bad. I mean, there is an economy there. If it's a good product and you're kind of artificially restricting from a certain geography, there's a demand, and obviously this bad act. If you can't actually meet that demand in a legal way, then obviously these illegal entities come up. So that's what is happening in a lot of these geographies, right? There are a lot of countries out there where, because of restrictions to access the most popular foundation models, we have this infrastructure coming up which pretty much proxies these large models, right, and provides the service to the local sort of users. And there's some very interesting things that are coming out of that, and I'll actually cover in the next slide. One important thing is, I think we see that these platforms are also used, because there's no traceability there, these platforms are used for very malicious usage. You are actually logging into a random GPT website, which is just a mirror web service, a fake website. But what they do is they kind of send your traffic to different foundational models, and there's no trace because they're kind of load balancing across different models. So this is extremely good for bad actors, because if I have to create a phishing email something, I mean, I would want to use something like this because they can't trace it back to me as a user. Now, on top of that, we're also seeing that there are these illegal business models built on top of this kind of an infrastructure. And now the attackers are moving on from just the foundational models to your chat assistants. So let's say you have a chat assistant, you have it's AI powered, it's let's say you're using OpenAI or Claude or one of these services. These attackers are now going after chat assistants as well. If they're really not protected well, they just use them to actually scrape prompts. This is how the infrastructure works, right? So what you see on the right-hand side is a standard is actually a legitimate LLM assistant, right? Chat assistant. What these attackers do is they would have either got access to these accounts because of stolen credentials through phishing or by other means. They keep these sessions open, and in the middle there's this proxy infrastructure. The proxy infrastructure is the one that acts like a funnel. It gets a request from a large number of mirror sites, takes all of these requests and sends it back to these individual websites, the sessions that are open at the backend. And then there are users who connect to these illegal mirror sites. Now, this proxy infrastructure also provides API kind of services. So there are users using the service illegally because the service is obviously restricted in those locations. But also there are these APIs that could be used for any kind of stuff. Like there are ways where you could, I mean, there are companies or there are these malicious companies that are building an entire ecosystem around it. The chat assistant here on the other end, the problem is that, hey, obviously it's a loss of revenue. The second thing they're also seeing is that if someone is developing a competing LLM in those geographies, they simply use these services. They literally, send the prompt back all the way back to these LLM platforms and then get the response back and train their own models. And so over a period of time, the typical, use case for distilled model, right? You essentially take a large foundational model and gather enough information, scrape enough information out of it, and eventually you distill it to your own model. And that's happening, in interesting geographies, right? And that's a big problem. And this, in fact, if you really think of it as we kind of see this trend coming up, this is by far one of the biggest attack vectors we are seeing right now, because it started as more of a rebellious movement against saying they're not getting access to these platforms, and it's now moving towards more of a really viable, parallel economy for this stolen model. So it's a big ecosystem. The other thing that we're seeing is if you are a product manager who is looking at launching chat assistant, you should be careful, because if these attackers can't go after, because think of it this way, this is a funnel that they have. As their users increase, they also have to increase the number of sessions or prompts or windows that they have, or the sessions they have open at the other end. And a lot of these foundational models obviously use protection. They'll get to know at some point, based on the velocity, that, okay, we're getting so many requests from these particular IPs, regions, and they're able to block them down. So the best way to do this is they have to spread their number of sessions. They have to spread it on the right-hand side. And the way they do that is, instead of just going for the foundational models, if they know that you have a chat assistant that uses one of this AI foundational models on the back end, and if you don't have the right protection, they'll go after it. they will submit the prompts directly into those, and then they'll scrape the prompt back. So you are pretty much paying for these bad actors, and then kind of helping them build their own models. So that's happening, and in fact, that's growing pretty quickly now, and we're seeing this trend pick up a lot.
That's very interesting. It's almost if I think about it, almost like bypass restriction as a service
Yep.
economy that's happening. And the whole chat use case is so interesting. I almost think it can also be a way to make it much easier to do a denial of service attack
Yep.
by just increasing the number of mirror sites, increasing the number of proxy infrastructure. So it can be used for good or for bad, like you mentioned. But that's a very interesting use case for this, which I didn't come across before. So it's cool.
Yeah, and the thing is, so this is an example of one of those sites there. As we were kind of looking through this, right? We were astonished at the number of people who are contributing to some of these repos. One of the most popular repo has about 1,000, 1,200 active contributors. Like they are actually developing the platform, they're building the system. It's a very decentralized ecosystem. And this is where I keep saying that I think if we think, this is why it's very different in the Gen AI phase, where in the past, uh, the number of defenders in most cases probably were, the numbers were higher as compared to attackers. As you mentioned, in most cases, they were smaller groups or lone wolf attackers. In case of the Gen AI world, the attackers in some cases are very much well equipped compared to the people who are actually defending these and protecting these websites. So that makes it very interesting. And then again, we're in an adversarial space, and they keep evolving pretty quickly. Like in this one, as I said, there's about 1,200 developers who are contributing to this ecosystem. Yep. So this is something I think if you're a PM, you need to keep an eye out. If you're launching chat assistants, just keep an eye out. Just you need to monitor your traffic. But this attack vector is coming. And this is how they're kind of selling the model. As I said, it's a parallel economy. What you see here is essentially a different name and a different offering in a country, but at the back end, they're using one of the foundational models. But they have their own price structure. They have their own, services, everything. Just catering to that market that doesn't have access to legal access. I mean, they don't have access to these actually large language models in a legal manner. So
For anyone who's watching this on YouTube or not live, this is not a session on how to do pricing for your product. So just to be clear about that, this is really cool, but this is not that call, right? We have several other calls for that. But this is almost, for many of us who live close to this stuff, this is very interesting. For those who do not live on this day to day, this is astounding that this is the depth of maturity of infrastructure of approach that some of these, I would say, almost attacker systems have. Right? It's moved away from just a set of people or a group of people to become full systems of attack. And I think, yeah, this is a really amazing example, a very vivid example of how this can be monetized.
yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting how these attackers are evolving with the technology. And the last one is MFA compromise, what we call as reverse proxy phishing. And this is again an interesting one. Again, if you're a PM in the financial sector, you will see this come up more often than not, and it's going to keep growing in the next years or so. So what has happened is, I mean, we all know about traditional phishing, and there are effective ways out there to really detect phishing websites, be it in terms of looking at DNS logs, analyzing the website, things like that, right? You look for obvious signals. Now that has changed, right? With the introduction of MFA, obviously the traditional phishing, MFA is a good cure for traditional phishing. It's a good way to actually tackle them. But with Gen AI, this particular attack vector has evolved as well. The first one is if you think of the attack vector, right? Traditionally or typically, the attack vector begins with a phishing email, and if you get most email service providers now, or your inbox, like Gmails of the world, like you have some level of phishing, email detection. It looks for different kinds of textual anomalies and email address anomalies, and will highlight that it's a good email, it's a suspicious email or not. With Gen AI, that's completely gone away. I mean, it. I mean, it's so easy to go and actually create a very, very real looking email, genuine looking email. So that has happened. Now I think gone are the way the days where you could simply look at an email and just say that this is fake. Now you take this, right? You take this capability where it's very easy for someone to lure someone to really click on a link. And then the next step is where you have these reverse proxy platforms, which we call as phishing as service platforms. In fact, they're phishing as service. All you do is you pay a subscription, you get access to a software, and you run a campaign, right? The way these proxies work is there is no fake website here, right? All they are doing is they're proxying a real website to the end user. And while they do that, they're siphoning out information. So if I'm a real user, for me, if I don't pay attention to obviously the domain name, everything looks the same because it's actually the real website that's been proxied to me, and I can go through the entire transaction. It doesn't, like, after login, the session doesn't fall. I mean, I don't get a 404. I pretty much go through the entire transaction the way I do with the real website, and that makes it even more potent because I saw the email, looked genuine. I go to the website, it looks absolutely the same way as my real website. It works the same way as my real website. But during this process, my information is getting actually siphoned out. Now, here's the thing. Now, MFA doesn't work in this scenario because what happens is, let's say I key in my credentials, I generate, I'm actually, I get an MFA, I get an OTP. It's actually the actual website, right? So I will get the OTP. What I key in is nothing but the proxy website. So I would just key in the credentials, I key in the OTP. I go through my transaction, but what happens is in the middle, the proxy will siphon out all of the information. This again was not very prevalent in the past. I think we've seen this in the last 2 years. It's been slowly picking up steam. But now with Gen AI in the mix, especially in terms of phishing, in terms of voice messages, in terms of emails, various ways of luring people to actually click onto that link, it's becoming much more potent, again, within the financial sector. So this is other area we're seeing impact of AI, especially Gen AI. And this is a general request flow, starting with your login page, reverse proxy there. You have your phishing side. It gets everything from the target website, just reads to the target website, sends it across to the end user. And then in the middle, the reverse proxy just siphons out all the information. Again, there are some things that if again you're a product manager in the space, yes, especially in the identity area, just keep in mind this is one of these emerging threat vectors, and it's growing pretty quickly. So I think those were all the. Sorry.
Just a quick point. Yeah, I'll say, being at Huntress, we see this every day. It's not just fintech. Phishing attacks and identity-based attacks are the number one attack vector that we see against all of our customers. We've moved away from a lookalike website that is slightly off in terms of the grammar or a dot somewhere else to an actual website that you're actually logging into. It could be Microsoft Outlook, logging into it, but your data is being, like you mentioned, siphoned off in the middle by a proxy, and that's kind of become the most common vector that we are seeing across all industries. It's fintech, but it's also stuff like medical, healthcare, construction. All of those industries, this has become, like, at least over the last, I would say, 12 months, the number one attack vector for us.
Yeah. And you're right. It started with fintech, but it's now, as with any other attack vector, if it's successful in one vertical, obviously then it's adopted by attackers across the board. So that's happening with this with reverse proxy phishing. But yeah, I mean, there are so many other different attack vectors and trends that we're seeing. I don't think so I'll be able to cover all of them here. I just picked a few interesting ones that we see are actually growing. But again, if you're a product manager in this space, there are a few things that you need to keep an eye out, right? One is if you already have a SaaS product out there, just ensure that you're checking the patterns of traffic. Because what we're also seeing is that, again, thanks to AI, there are ways to evaluate how websites behave and look at the response times and then plan your traffic, plan your requests accordingly so that you stay under the radar. Right? So that is happening as well. So just pay attention to what you see on your traffic. Is it sinusoidal? Are there small, spikes, things like that? Look for any on-page like behaviors, because gone are the days where you simply look for basic browser-based signals. Those won't work. Again, thanks to all the new technologies out there. You'll have to now rely on behavior. You'll have to look at automation from different angles, from different approaches to really nail down and see if it's a good user or not. If you have a chat assistant, and I know many product managers, that's kind of a top of their list, right? To have it on the website. Please be careful. Please have the right protections in place. Don't just have an API. Don't just have a window which just directly talks to one of these foundational models. We've seen cases where people didn't even know that their chat assistant solution was abused until they saw the bill. Implement any bot management solution, especially because attacks have become very sophisticated. So it's better to rely on a specialist solution that can actually protect you across different kinds of attack vectors out there. The last one is just perform a comprehensive assessment of your security posture. We had very interesting scenarios where there was abuse happening, there was fraud happening in accounts, and the teams that were responsible for the security of the house, they didn't even know about it until the finance team comes and says, hey, you know what, we paid so much for SMS OTP, for instance. And then they get to know, oh, there was SMS fraud happening on my account. So it's very important to not only look at your traffic-based metrics, but it's also important to look at other contributing metrics, be it your spend, right, be it your compute costs, things like that, because all of them kind of then gives you help you kind of identify some of these under the radar attack vectors that are happening on your website. So yeah, it's a very different world out there. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Yes, sir.
That is awesome. Thank you, Vikas. We're almost out of time here, so I only have one question for you, and it's slightly philosophical. So, we began in this, I know maybe 2 decades ago, if I look back at cybersecurity, where it was a race, right, between hackers, between defenders, and it kind of kept on going that way. You're one step ahead with better tools. Hackers catch up, you're one more step ahead. Then we had the advent of AI, where ML kind of gave the defenders a leg up. We moved to Gen AI, where it became again more equal. You had AI assisted SOCs, but you also now have Gen AI based attack techniques and tools. So once again, we have AI plus attackers fighting AI plus defenders. What's next, right? We're going back to, hey, humans are better than AI, and now we're going back to humans trying to safeguard against these newer fangled attacks. It's kind of a circle.
Yep.
Where are we going? What's next? How do we break the cycle? Can we break the cycle?
I don't. So here's the thing. I think that's an interesting world that we live in. Again, if you're operating in this adversarial space, right? This is bound to happen. As long as I go back to if it's economically viable for an attacker, and if they can make enough money out of it, this cycle will continue. Because it's all about, if they have significant ROI coming out of it, they will continue doing this kind of attacks, and they'll start investing. So I don't think so you can break the cycle with a mindset that I'll develop something absolutely new or groundbreaking that these attackers will not be able to evade. I think at some point they will. I think the mindset should be, how do you make it not very viable, which goes back to my first slide, is so that what may happen is at some point they'll say, okay, this is not worth my time, so let me look for something else. We had those scenarios. There was an interesting case of a very smart AI programmer who was actually building vision solver kind of capabilities, and I was sharing with a lot of attackers. At some point, we made it got very difficult for him because of some of the things that we introduced. And the guy publicly said, you know what, I'll find a job. I think I have better ROI finding a job. And the guy was actually a PhD in AI. So PhD in computer science with specialization in AI. But so I think that's the only way. I think it is to make it not very viable for these attackers to continue.
That's awesome. The age-old adage, just stay one step ahead and continue staying one step ahead of attackers. That's awesome. I learned a lot. Very, very interesting session today, Vikas. The depths to which this cyber attack industry has developed is amazing. Not in a good way, but as an observer, I definitely feel that these advancements are simply astounding. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you for sharing your knowledge in this space, and also all the stuff around the PMs, what PM should do, what they should look for. That was awesome. For anyone who is attending live, if you couldn't get to your questions, please send us to us over LinkedIn. We'd be happy to help. For anyone watching this in the future on YouTube, I hope you got value from it. We will be back once again next month with our next PTC webinar. But until then, thank you for attending, and thank you, Vikas. Cheers.
Thank you, Nisarg. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Take care.